Bum. Okay, greetings all. Apparently we are live, and I'm supposed to wait, I think, for a moment. And okay. It appears that we are live and we are good to go. If any of you would like to enter into the comments that you can hear, that would be great. And can you guys hear me? And do you see Astrology Night? No picture, no nothing. And what are you seeing on the screen? There's no picture on the screen. It should say Astrology Night with Rick Levine. Okay. And I'm going to now take that down and put me up with a little luck. And with a little luck, there should be me here on screen. And welcome all to Astrology Night. And it's going to take a couple of minutes to get going and to get the hang of this, because as many of you know, I am in England, having been here for the 56th Astrological Association of Great Britain annual conference, and that was really, really good. And as some of you know, I've been spending time here with Steve Judd, who's not joining us tonight. I know that some of you are going to be disappointed, but it is 2:30 in the morning, and Steve is leaving tomorrow for Morocco. He's working on a documentary, which I actually recorded with him yesterday and today. And so he needed some rest. So what we have for tonight, though, is going to be, I think it's going to be fun. And yes, my shirt and my background are in fact coordinated. They were done by the same artists in Indonesia, and there was just a wooden door behind me, so I threw that up to be behind me. So I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about the astrology of now, but because you get that from the YouTube video, I don't want to spend a lot of time doing that right now. I promised a bunch of people, and I'm going to instead, we're going to focus on the charts of the four candidates that are running on the American presidential election ticket for both president and vice president. So many of you requested that, and we're just going to see what we can get into on that. And then we're going to take our 10 or 15 minute break, as we always do when I'm at Soul Food. And for all of you who are at Soul Food, greetings to you. And thank you for showing up and being part of the community watch group. What we're going to do, though, is that we're going to take that 10 or 15 minute break in about an hour. And then we're going to actually do the charts that we would normally do when I'm live. And by the way, in the chat box now, you can see that we just posted a link that whether you watch it now or come back to it later, Steve and I did a very short, just a video for fun that he posted on his channel today. But the link is there if you want to watch it. When we take our 10 or 15 minute break, for those of you who are at the community watch at Soul Food, you can put your name and email address and birth date, place and time on a small slip of paper, and Sam will collect those. And thank you, Sam, for dealing with the camera and the projection at Soul Food. And you can give that to Sam, and we're going to just pick our regular 2 or 3 names from the pile. And if you do submit your name, you do have to be willing to step up to the microphone and be on camera. And so we will not use your last name, but we will use your chart and your first name. And so that should be done with Sam when we take our break, so that when we come back from break, we'll have that birth data already loaded and ready to go. So just a very short overview. Actually, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to bring up a chart for starting now, and see if this actually is going to work. And Sam, you can tell me if this chart is actually in fact working. That would be great. And we are temporarily looking at not the chart that I want to look at eventually. We are currently looking at a chart here for January 1st of this year. And then we're going to hang on 1 second, and I'm going to get the chart up that I want to look at. And that is going to be this chart right here. Just bear with me here a second. Okay, this is going to be a chart for. Okay, so what we should have in front of us right now, and if Sam or Gail can let me know that this is actually here, we should have a chart that shows 19 degrees Aquarius rising. And this is a chart for Redmond, Washington. And it's going to show, this chart is going to be, or is, for 6:37 p.m. And that is the time in Redmond, although, like I said, it's 2:37 a.m. here on Saturday morning. But in this chart, we can in fact see that the sun is at 14 degrees and 56 minutes Virgo, and that the moon is at 28 degrees and 11 minutes of Libra. Is that a chart showing? Can you guys see that? Can someone just give me a confirmation on that, that you do see that chart? I know I have a few second delay here. September 6th, yeah, perfect. And actually, before we go on, I'm going to quickly change this chart so that just hang on again here 1 second. I want to edit this chart, and just very, very quickly here, just bear with me again one quick moment. This is a chart for now, but I want to run this okay. All right, so now we have that exact same chart, except what is showing here is that it's showing a 0 degrees Aries rising. And I want to tell you why I'm doing that, but just I want to get a couple of points out of the way here. So we're going to get displayed points, and we're just going to go back to this, and there we go. All right, so the chart that we showed originally with Aquarius rising is for 6:37 in the evening in Redmond, but the fact of the matter is that showed the sun just kind of beginning to set, moving towards setting. And so instead of that, I've shifted here to an Aries rising chart. And really what we want to look at here is the fact that the sun is at 14, almost 15 degrees of Virgo, opposite Saturn at 16 degrees of Pisces, meaning that over the next day, the sun will be in an exact opposition to Saturn. And you can see that thick red line there connecting the sun and Saturn. But the other thing that's of importance here is that these orange lines are square and a half square to Pluto. And the reason why this is so significant, and a lot of astrologers are not using half squares, that's semi-squares, and a square and a half or a sesqui-square, just like a sesquicentennial is 100 years plus a half is 150 years. A sesqui-square is a square and a half. And the sun to Pluto today is exactly a square and a half. It's right now, at this moment, it's 1/60th of a degree, or 1 minute of orb from being exact. And meanwhile, we have Saturn moving into an exact half square with Pluto. And the half squares between Saturn and Pluto, and the square and a half between the Sun and Pluto are incredibly important, because they do not work like weak squares. They actually almost work like more highly focused squares. And so what we have right now is this building half square between Saturn and Pluto that's not exact until September 25th. But because Pluto and Saturn are both moving so slowly, they're both retrograde, but they're both moving so slowly that it's actually going to take another 3 weeks or nearly 3 weeks until that aspect is exact. However, right now, today on the 6th and tomorrow on the 7th will even be more exact. The sun is at a point where it's exacerbating this half square between Saturn and Pluto, because it's opposite Saturn and a square and a half to Pluto. What does this mean? It means that Saturn, about structure, boundaries, authority, reality, and Pluto, the ever-changing boundaries between structures. Pluto, the metamorphosis, the caterpillar becoming the butterfly. When we have Saturn making a conjunction, or a half square, or a square, or an opposition, or a square and a half, when Saturn is making any of those aspects to Pluto, there's often conflicts between boundaries. Kathleen says niacin for mental health. Well, it can be that, because there's a flush, there's a change, there's a movement, an expansion, or a shifting of the boundaries. But it's just as often felt as a shifting of boundaries that are physical in the real world, or ideological. And certainly we're seeing this, and we've seen this over the last century and a half, play out in the Middle East in the ongoing battle, or the ongoing struggle between Zionism and the colonial kind of reclaiming of lands, and what's going on between the Zionist state of Israel and the Palestinian people. And this is certainly being played out elsewhere. It's certainly being played out in the American elections. And it's something that will continue, because this Saturn-Pluto half square was exact back in early May, when there was this intense few days of Israeli activity in the Gaza Strip, and also attacks in Lebanon. But we're going to see this again play out toward the end of September, and then for the third and final time in January of next year. So this is a major aspect sequence that's being played out. And at the same time, we can also see on this chart that Jupiter at 19 degrees of Gemini is only a few degrees. It's actually about 3 degrees away from its square to Saturn. And we had the first of the 3 exact hits on that last month in August. And this will play through again in December of this year, and then on through June of next year. This is an incredibly dynamic period of time. And that's the most important thing that I really want to say about this chart at all. Just simply the fact that we have such powerful dynamics building, And we're feeling some of them right now. And in fact, the other thing that we're feeling today is this Mercury square to Uranus. And when Mercury squares Uranus, we often get announcements that are not what we expected, that are either shocking or sometimes breaking through or something breaking down. We'll see how this plays out over in the next day or so, but we've already seen the delay in the sentencing of the conviction of Donald Trump on the 34 felony accounts in the New York court system, that's been delayed till after Election Day. For better or worse, it's been a surprise. It's something that most people did not expect. And that is the kind of thing we might expect. You know, the Mercury is about communication and words and messages, and Uranus is unexpected. And so, of course, when we have a Mercury square Uranus, it's often we expect the unexpected, which of course is crazy because how can you expect the unexpected? But these are all things that are playing out now. And I just wanted to mention them in passing. We drill down on them a lot deeper in the monthly overview. And I'm going to come back in the mid-month update for those of you who are on the Patreon $3 a month program. I'm going to spend on the mid-month a deeper dive into the recent history of the Saturn-Pluto cycle and the events that have happened over the past 100 years as Saturn either lined up with Pluto, made that semi-square like it is now, the square, the sesqui-square, the opposition, and so on. And we'll follow that through as we talk about what's unfolding these days. But I just wanted to start off bringing that up. So that is, I think, enough there. I'm going to check in the chat right now before we move on. And yeah, someone posted, oh, hi, that Chernobyl is on fire. I don't know what that means. If you want to put in any more on that, that would be helpful. I don't have that information in front of me. And yes, and another thing, that's right, Ken Stover posted that Liz Cheney, and Dick Cheney also endorsed Kamala Harris. So there are Mercury square Uranus. Remember, it was the day that President Biden took himself off the candidacy for president and endorsed Kamala. That was on the day that Mercury squared Uranus the first time, and this being the last time that it does it, we're getting, it seems, more of that kind of stuff. So just food for thought, and we'll just have to see how it plays out. Oh, and hi, Florence, and says there's a volcano going in Italy. I'm not completely up on current events because I've been off the grid a bit traveling, and so thank you all for that feedback. All right, we're going to shift gears a bit here, and I want to plow through the charts of the various candidates. And my goal here is not to predict the election, because quite frankly, I think making predictions like that is not useful. It's not helpful at all. As many of you know, those of you who have followed my work, you know that my prediction is that if you don't participate and vote, then you don't deserve the right to complain, after the fact. Meaning that the future is not as fixed as astrologers would often like to believe. Rather than that, it's what happens and what we all do today, tomorrow, next week, next month, between now and the election that will, in fact, impact the election. And I feel a bit like a broken record when I kind of come back to this whole concept of thinking, cosmically and acting locally. But the point is here that what unfolds over election day will be largely a result of who is active and who actually goes out of the way to participate in the unfolding process that's going on. Whoops, sorry, I was reaching for my cup of tea to have something to sip, so just bear with me here a second. And as I reached forward, my earplugs popped out, so I'm back. All right, so let's get out and vote. I mean, and the update on Chernobyl apparently is that there is a forest fire in the exclusion zone around Chernobyl, and that is something that has just apparently happened. I didn't have that information. And thank you guys for keeping us posted on that. Okay, so what I want to do actually now is shift gears and just take a look at some charts. So let me go here, and we're going to all right, let's start off by looking at a chart that many of us have looked at. Many of us have been looking at the chart of Donald Trump for several years, and some people might say we've been looking at this chart for too long. But the point here is that this is an accurate chart. We have good data on Donald Trump's chart, and I think the important things to note is that, number one, Donald Trump was born at a full moon. You can see here that the moon at 21 degrees of Sagittarius is opposite the sun at 22 degrees, almost 23 degrees of Gemini. And so he was born just a few hours prior to a full moon. But we also note two other very significant things. First of all, we can see how close the sun and moon are to the north and south nodes of the moon. As many of us know, when there is a full moon or a new moon conjoined or close to the nodal axis, that means that there is an eclipse, because the full moon is occurring at the same plane as that's the moon going around the earth is occurring at the same plane as the earth going around the sun, and that's when an eclipse occurs. This shows the erratic instability and kind of altered timing of Donald Trump, because he was actually born at just a couple of hours prior. He was born at a full moon eclipse, at a lunar eclipse. And as if that wasn't enough, he was also born with the sun, and therefore the north node of the moon, conjoined to Uranus. It's about a 5-degree orb, but on a conjunction, that's certainly within impact, within effectual range. And someone who is born with the sun lined up with Uranus would take on some of those Uranian qualities. What are Uranian qualities? Well, they're unpredictableness. They certainly can be genius or ingenious, but they can also be like the mad professor, like Doc in Back to the Future. Often with a Uranus sun, or in Trump's case, a Uranus moon opposition also, because the moon is opposite Uranus and the sun is conjunct Uranus. There is certainly an other than normalness, a craziness, if you will. And I certainly don't necessarily mean a clinical craziness, although there are people who would argue for that. But this is certainly an exacerbation of the fact that he was born at a full moon eclipse. And not only is the sun conjoined with Uranus, kind of that out of the box, the not following the rules, the eccentricity, the other than normalness, which can be also, like I said, ingenuity. And certainly whether you like Trump or don't like Trump, here is not the issue. The issue is that somehow he's gotten as far as he has, defying all the common laws that other people might follow. And here's the other important thing here, and that is that how close Uranus is in his chart that is being trined by Jupiter at 17 degrees of Libra, and it is stationary, which gives it even more power. Jupiter at 17 degrees of Libra, trining Uranus at 17 degrees of Gemini. What is that about? Well, Uranus trine Jupiter in many ways, that is the electrical power of Uranus that's being magnified, expanded, amplified by Jupiter. But it's not just Jupiter, it's Jupiter lined up with Chiron. Now, remember, although we often refer to as Chiron the wounded healer, the fact of the matter is that Chiron is also the teacher. Chiron is the person who instructs others or teaches others, often based upon the wounds that they've encountered. Now, of course, that can be very positive, or perhaps it can be a bit aberrated. And someone might suggest that in Trump's case, it is that. When I see the Jupiter conjunct Uranus, when I see the Jupiter conjunct Chiron, because Jupiter is often hopeful, it's expansive, it's big ideas, lined up with Chiron, it's often the person who's always seeing the pot of gold at the end of the next rainbow. It's often the person who sees the hope, the potential right around the corner. And it's like often those people never reach that cure, that solution, but it's always like we can get there. It's right around the bend. And I think that in some ways, this is one of the things that Trump sells to the general public, this idea that, that we can get to someplace that's better just because we're not there yet, and yet it's always one step away. And it's an important part of his chart. Another very significant part of his chart, though, is the fact that he has 29 degrees and 58 minutes of Leo rising, with Mars rising on the ascendant. Now, when Mars is rising, or when Mars is close to the ascendant, it gives that fiery energy, the ability to come through one's personality. In Trump's case, I would say that this has something to do with his orange color. Because orange is actually a shade of red, and yet orange is kind of a subdued red. And I think we get that subdued energy by the fact that Mars is very closely semi-sextile to Venus, and Venus is conjoined with Saturn. Now, when we see Venus and Saturn together, it's often the person who does not have the love, does not have the immediacy of happiness and of pleasure right in front of that person. It's often the person who gets gratification or rewards delayed until later in life. But it's also the person, especially with that Saturn and Venus in Cancer, it's also the person who is insecure, who feels like they don't have the love that they want or that other people have. And because Venus is not only love and it's also money, you often see Saturn and Venus conjunct in charts of people who feel like they never have enough, and it's not just greed, although it certainly can be. It's the feeling of needing to accumulate more money to accumulate the love that they don't have. Incidentally, Bill Gates also has Venus conjunct Saturn. And so it's interesting that we see that here. He has it differently. I think he has his in Aries, if I'm not mistaken. But the other thing here about Mars rising in Leo, remember, Leo is the in the male, in the yang sense, with Mars in Leo, we certainly get that Leo energy in that strong yang sense. And it's bravado, and it's look at me, and I am the center of attention. And I do think it's important to understand that that's not necessarily the sign of a healthy Leo, because Leo is the expression and the intention to share love. But when it's aberrated, it needs to receive that love without necessarily expressing it. And so I think here this Mars on the ascendant in Leo is very much about the anger that is expressed, and even the hate, one might say, that is expressed in order to fire up people to be seen and to be heard. And yet there's one other thing here that I think is quite important. And that is that in astrology, fixed stars often can have strong impact. And there are 4 stars that are considered by the Babylonians to be the watchers of each of the seasons. They are the guards for the seasons, if you will. And each of those fixed stars have a sense of power or royalty or fame and fortune associated with them. And here's the thing. The thing is that each of those fixed stars have with it a caveat, that if you fail to do this one thing, your downfall will be assured. Now, the fixed star that is at 29 degrees of Leo, now it's precessed back, or it's precessed into 0 degrees of Virgo, is the star Regulus. And Regulus of the 4 watchers is often considered to be the most powerful of those fixed stars, because Regulus is very much a king star. It's very much a kingmaker star. It's a star of royalty because it's leonine. But the caveat to the fixed star Regulus has to do with revenge. And what the literature around the star around the star of Regulus states, that the star Regulus denotes fame, fortune, and royalty, with the exception of ensuring downfall if one is vengeful. And I've been saying for years that Trump's downfall will be his constant desire to seek revenge. And that's right. B. Havens has just typed, with Regulus, if you commit the act of revenge, it will bring your downfall. And one might suggest that there are other things contributing to Trump's likely and potential current downfall, although I would not in any way say that it is ensured, which is why we need to do whatever we need to do to, push our government in the United States in a right direction. And I just want to go on record here, just before everyone jumps all over me and gets on my case for one thing or another, is that I, like Carl Jung, don't believe that our happiness will ever be solved by politicians. It has to do with the inner work that each and every person needs to do. And yet there are certainly points at which it's almost like inflection points. And we may be at one of those points, and I will leave it up to you as to, what you each do individually. But I would just suggest that whether or not one has faith that any politician will do what is necessary to be done, that sometimes there is enough of a dividing line that one will at least create an environment where you can still work toward convincing government officials to do what needs to be done. But someone just typed in Mystic Alchemy How does one learn more about fixed stars? Well, we have this magical, wonderful thing called the internet and Google. There are a number of good books on fixed stars, one by Bernadette Brady, for example. There's numbers of good books if you just simply Google books on fixed stars. There are several, and it's also easy to find online sources where you can actually look at the points in your chart and see what fixed stars are close to them. Although most good astrology software will do that also. And Bernadette Brady's work on fixed stars and the reports that she has are absolutely excellent. All right, so let me just see if there's anything else I want to mention about Donald Trump's chart right now. Also the fact that he has Mercury, Saturn, and Venus all in Cancer. This is the part, of Donald Trump, which is not about the fiery, feisty, kind of charge and what's the word I'm looking for? The fire and brimstone almost of that Mars and Leo rising. And it's not about the Gemini sun with Uranus on the full moon eclipse in Sagittarius. That moon in Sagittarius is the big ideas and the, kind of lack of details. And yet that Gemini sun with the North Node and Uranus is basically the talker. And certainly there are people who would say that Trump is not a great orator. I mean, there are some people that say that he can't even finish a complete sentence. Regardless, his words being Gemini are like all over the map. I think of Bob Dylan as being a Gemini, who's someone that, even though his words might be very clever at times and very deep at times, you can't trust anything he says, because Geminis can have the ability to be glib and to be clever and to say what needs to be said rather than speaking the truth. Or maybe said another way, Geminis can actually alter the truth in their mind in order to make whatever point they need to make. So certainly we could talk more about Trump's chart, and maybe next month I'll dig a little deeper and we'll look at some of the harmonics and also the upcoming transits, which I'm not going to do now on purpose. But that will help us when we do that, get a better sense of what's coming up around the corner or around this bend of time, because certainly when we look at transits and progressions, we get a sense of the timing. That being said, I would like to jump from Donald Trump's chart to Kamala Harris's chart. But before I do, I just want to remind ourselves that Donald Trump was born at a full moon. Are you with me here? And now we go to Kamala Harris's chart, and Kamala Harris was also born at a full moon. Now, she was not born at a full moon eclipse, but she was born at a full moon, and that full moon is so close. Donald Trump was born a few hours prior to the full moon. Kamala Harris is born a few minutes prior to the full moon, because you can see here her sun is at 27 degrees Libra and 48 minutes, and her moon is at 27 degrees Aries and 39 minutes. That's 9 minutes of arc, roughly 15, 20 minutes of Earth time away from the perfection of the full moon. Now, we talked about Donald Trump having the Gemini sun, which gives him that ability to talk in front of a crowd. Kamala Harris not only has Gemini rising, and the rising sign, of course, is how we're nailed to the three-dimensional universe. The rising sign is how we appear to be seen by other people. It's the interface between our inside and our outside, and also between the outside and our inside. And with Donald Trump, remember that Donald Trump has Leo rising and that Mars on the ascendant, and it's almost like the energy is always coming off him, like the sun shines. It's not taking in energy, it's giving energy outward. It's putting the energy out. There's no room for it to take that energy in. And yet when we look at Kamala Harris's chart with the Gemini rising, there's that back and forth. There's the in-out going at the same time. And another thing that's very significant is that although Kamala Harris was not born at a full moon eclipse, she was born with the nodal axis conjoining the horizon, meaning she was born with the north node rising and the south node setting, because the north and south nodes are always opposite each other. North node on the ascendant gives someone the ability. Now, this is going to sound, I don't want to say it's going to sound weird, and this is not anything I've gotten out of a textbook. I've known several people who have very close north node conjunctions to their ascendant in various different signs. And they all strive to find happiness. Now, I know one could say, well, doesn't everyone try to be happy? Doesn't everyone? Oh, as Allison said that she's not happy about my statement regarding Geminis. It was very broad and a bit insulting. Look, I have Gemini rising. I'm not saying that Geminis don't speak the truth. I'm saying that Geminis have the ability to connect the dots. And not every Gemini, but in doing that, Geminis have the ability to connect dots that other people don't connect. And Gemini is like an AM radio. Geminis can tune reality. This can be genius. I'm sorry if it sounded like I was down or negative on Gemini risings. I happen to like my Gemini rising. It gives me the ability to connect those dots. And yes, Allison, or B. Havens, whether you're good-hearted or not good-hearted is not what I'm addressing here. And in fact, I mean, some of the most witty and good-hearted and brilliant people are either Geminis or Gemini risings. And I would even argue that even though someone like Bob Dylan or another Gemini like Paul McCartney, I think he's a Gemini. I mean, these are people who can be incredibly good-hearted. I'm just addressing the fact that with Geminis, there's this ability to take pieces of information and make connections between them in ways that other people can't. And it can either be used for good or bad. So, thank you for saying that. But coming back to the North Node conjunct the Ascendant, I often find that those people, even though maybe everyone on some level wants to be happy, there's this sense of happiness becomes a driving factor in that person's life and the lives of those around that person. And I know that that Kamala Harris has been criticized, for her laughter, which is, I think, in some ways associated with that North Node rising. There's a desire to be uplifting and to be happy. And yes, a Libra rising tends to, make someone be a peacemaker on one hand, but a Libra rising can also help someone be an incredible strategist. And sometimes that goes along with peacemaking, but it also can go along with spreading whatever one's agenda is. We have to be careful about making judgments about good, bad on any sign, because any sign and every sign can be used for a variety of expressions. And Florence says that Gemini moon and North Node, there also. So, yeah. And Gemini husband is always spinning tall tales about ordinary things. Yeah, Geminis are really, they're great storytellers. Thank you, Gail, for saying that. Gail, who knows me as well as, anyone does. As she wrote, my love of words comes across from my Gemini rising. It is true. Anyhow, back to Kamala Harris's chart for a moment. There's a few things about her chart that are very important. And for those of you who are in my apprentice program, every month we have a mystery guest chart that we kind of look at. People don't know whose chart it is. And a few months back, we did Kamala Harris's chart before anyone had a clue that she might be actually running for president of the United States. And one of the things that we all agreed on is that her chart had this level of symmetry that is rare. And this symmetry actually shows up in many ways, and it shows up in other harmonics also when we look at some of the lesser used aspects, including quintiles and septiles and other aspects that many astrologers don't use, but in deeper work I always use. But even just looking at her traditional aspects, the fact that she has two sets of trines that are crisscrossing each other, and you can see here Chiron is trine Neptune and the Sun is trine Saturn. And it's actually really the Sun Mercury trine Saturn, and they crisscross kind of at the same axis as the moon, and this is a wider trine, but the moon trines Mars, and Jupiter is trining Venus, or that, Jupiter and Taurus trining Venus and the other planets, widely speaking, but Uranus and Pluto in Virgo. And where those crisscross, if you draw a straight line through where those trines crisscross, and all the way through to where the other trines crisscross, you pass in the center the crisscrossing of two major aspects, which are the full moon, that's the moon in Aries, that feisty, fiery part of her that's willing to fight, that's willing to take on, someone without backing down, in a way that made her a very effective prosecutor. And we'll see if she's elected president, if it makes her an effective fighter for the middle class, as she claims she will be. And again, I'm not saying she won't, I'm just saying that these things remain to be seen. But the moon opposing the sun very closely, and then separate from that, we have Chiron opposing the Virgo stellium. And it's opposing Venus and Pluto and Uranus. But if we take the halfway point, the midpoint between Uranus and Pluto, that's 14 degrees of Virgo, which makes that Chiron opposition even closer. And where those 2 points intersect, again, if we draw a straight line through the intersection of the thin trines between Jupiter and the Virgo planets, and the moon in fiery Aries and Mars in fiery Leo, and we draw that straight line through that, and then through the crisscrossings of these oppositions in the center, of which there are several that are a bit wider, but the tightest ones being the moon opposition to the sun and Chiron opposition to the Uranus-Pluto, and keep going, and we come through the trines from Chiron to Neptune and Saturn to the sun. We can see that this whole chart has kind of what would be called bilateral symmetry. There's a connection between, almost like a mirror image of planets from one side of the chart to the other, that makes this chart in some way kind of like a seesaw. And that seesaw goes back and forth and up and down. And in some ways, it's even reflected back to the fact that she has a Gemini rising. I'm not saying she can't be trusted. I'm saying that she can, however, see two sides of an issue, and it may take pressure and or proper advice to get her to act one way or another in the long term, because there's a part of her that has that peacemaker, diplomatic, wanting to allow everyone kind of at the party to be seen and heard, that sun in Libra, and yet that feisty, fiery, combative, even ready to do conflict Aries moon. But here's the interesting thing. And that is that if you look at the two oppositions between Chiron and Uranus, Pluto, Venus, and the Mercury, which has slipped into Scorpio, giving her a bit of a sting, actually, but still close enough to the Libra sun that there still is that peacemaker, diplomat, Libran energy opposing the moon. And what I'm going to do here for a moment is I'm going to take out a lot of the extra, I'm going to call it noise. It's not really noise, but you'll see here in just a moment what I want you to see. And I want to create a temporary connection just so that we can see one thing in particular. And we want the sun, just bear with me here a second. We want the sun and the moon and Chiron and the, let's put in the whole list, the Venus, Uranus, Pluto. Venus, Uranus, Pluto. Now we're going to take out everything else and just leave that in there for a moment. Now, what we're looking at here is, I think, a configuration that is just as strong as a grand trine or a T-square or a mystic rectangle or a kite, but it's not one that most astrologers use because it uses also the half squares and the squares and a half. Remember, I talked at the very beginning about the half square that is developing this month between Saturn and Pluto, and the temporary square and a half between the Sun and Pluto that's going on right now on September 5th, 6th, 7th. When we look at Kamala's chart, though, what we see is that the two oppositions that seem to be at first totally separate, what we see that the Chiron to the moon is a half square. The moon to the Virgo stellium is a square and a half. The Virgo stellium back to the Sun Mercury is a half square. And then the Sun Mercury back to Chiron is a square and a half. This makes, I call this Thor's rectangle, because Thor basically has the power of bringing the thunder of the lightning down to earth and striking that energy. And this is an incredibly potent configuration that I think really gives a chart power. And I don't think that we've seen the power of this chart yet. Maybe those people who were aware of Kamala Harris's work as a prosecutor and attorney general. And remember, there are many people who criticized Kamala Harris for being too brutal and too over prosecutorial when she was a prosecuting attorney. And so this is that part of her that I think is really willing to do that. And that may or may not end up being a good thing. Again, I'm not here making predictions as to how people are going to work with this energy, but I am suggesting that this is a powerhouse that we haven't seen as vice president, because the role of vice president is not to wield one's own hammer. The job of vice president is to support the president. And so with whatever criticism that one may give Kamala Harris, and I'm okay with whatever criticism anyone gives based upon reality, but if it's based upon what she did or didn't do as vice president, or even what she's not doing now as vice president, the fact is that her job as vice president is to support the president, whether or not you think that's a good idea. Yeah, Maggie says she put more black men in jail for smoking pot. Absolutely. And there's this, I mean, again, I'm not here to defend or to promote any one point of view. I'm simply saying that when we look at her chart, this is where that may be coming from, or partly coming from. And yes, we could do a total deep dive on how the American privately owned for-profit prison system is a post-civil rights form of slavery. And that's just another whole piece that probably will piss some people off. And there's a lot of different ways we can look at all of these things. But this particular configuration is incredibly potent. Now, when we go back and we look now at the rest of the chart, and we add in we go back and we add in the other planets, we can now see that I've just put in here all of the cardinal points too, so that we're now looking at the ascendant, and we can see here that the Sun trine Saturn, which is very close. And the Sun trine Saturn is actually a piece which says that what I am doing is going to be real. I'm saying that from Kamala Harris's point of view. The Sun trine Saturn is a reality check. And what's interesting is how close that Sun-Saturn trine is to making a grand trine with the Gemini rising, and also how close the descendant point is that makes a trine with the moon and Mars. And in a way, that moon-Mars trine, which is about an 8-degree orb, if again we look at midpoints, the midpoint of 21 and 27 is about 24, and that's the degree of the descendant and ascendant. So when we just look at the trines and sextiles, we can see this incredible pattern, again, that's quite symmetrical, that goes all the way around, that looks like two interlacing grand trines, or a Star of David, if you will, or it's even close to a grand sextile. It's not quite that because it's a bit out of whack, but it's extraordinary. Again, regardless of what politics you may or may not have, those charts in themselves are quite potent. And also the fact, let me clear up some of these lines here and get rid of some of the aspects to the cardinal points, just because it's a bit overwhelming. Aspected points, and we'll go back to, I think that one will do it. Yeah. Before we leave this chart, I just also want to point out that we have an intuitive, psychic, sensitive, empathic Pisces midheaven. Yet Saturn in Aquarius is only 4 degrees away from that midheaven, which means that Mercury is very closely trine to the midheaven, only 1 degree orb away from that, which I think has to do with an ability to communicate to the masses about those things with a very strong perspective. Someone I think pointed out, and I didn't mention this earlier, that both Harris and Trump both have Mars in Leo. Of course, the difference is that Trump's Mars in Leo is at the anaretic, the ascendant is at the anaretic degree, and the Mars and the ascendant are, fairly close. Mars fairly close, and the ascendant very close to Regulus. Interestingly enough, though, that when we go to Kamala Harris's chart, Regulus is actually at the base of her chart. It's only a degree, now it's at 0 degrees, so it's about 2 degrees away from opposing her midheaven and opposing her Saturn at birth. And again, I think it's important, but it remains to be seen as to how this all plays out. Let me check on the comments here. We're going to take a really quick look at the vice presidential charts, and then we're going to take a break and come back and do a couple of charts. Now, I'm not following the chats here completely, but I see someone saying if people can't say something nice, refrain from commenting. And yes, and in fact, Gail, if you're there, if people, I don't care what your politics are. I mean, I do. I have my orientation or my preferences, which may or may not be yours, and that's okay. But if you're not going to be nice, be not nice to yourself. Don't do it here. And that's right. If you got something to say that's astrological and you want to say it in a way that's inclusive, I don't care what side of any political spectrum that you're on. But if you got crap and if you're just saying bullshit about people because you don't agree with them, don't say it here. And if that offends you, then just go to another site. There's a lot of astrologers, that are doing, very different things, and you can find someone that supports your perspective if that's what you want. Personally, I'm happy to listen to an astrologer who totally is on an opposite side of some of the most important issues that are important to me, because I learn from that person. I have no problem with people who do not have my perspective and who do not have my point of view, but I have no patience at all, and I'm not paying enough attention to the chat to monitor it. So I am asking Gail and or Sam that if people are not saying anything nice, just delete their comment, kick them out. I don't care. It's not for here. It's like when you're in my chat room or on my, YouTube page, it's like you're coming to dinner at my house and you're my guest, and I'm happy to have you here, even if your opinion isn't my opinion. But, if you're crapping on my white tablecloth, I'm not going to invite you to dinner. It's that simple. So enough. I'm sorry if that was like a bit of a rant, but please. Okay, so someone's saying nobody's being rude, Maggie. Thank you. I saw someone say someone was being rude. I just want to be clear that you get to say whatever you want as long as you're being inclusive and as long as you're not just talking crap. That's it. All right. So done. Thank you for that. And thank you, Maggie. Like I said, I'm not reading all of the all of the chats. I saw someone say something about be nice or whatever, and I'm just we can be politically active and have different perceptions based upon similar facts, and do it in dialogue. Okay. End of that. I do want to take a quick look at the other two charts that I have. We do have accurate data we have accurate data for let's find this for JD Vance. We only have a birth date. There's no time for Tim Walz, but we'll look at that chart also. So JD Vance, when I look at this chart, again, I see a Leo rising. It's also very close to Donald Trump's ascendant. It's only a couple of degrees off. Regulus is still near there. I find it interesting that Donald Trump's Mars at almost 27 degrees of Leo is closely conjunct JD Vance's ascendant at 27 degrees of Leo. So there's some connection there in the fieriness of with which they present themselves. We see that JD Vance has a moon in Libra. It's not strongly connected to anything. At least with using traditional aspects, it's kind of out there by itself. What is strong, however, is his sun in the 12th house, Sun and Venus, which are kind of a little hidden, but they're or a lot hidden in the 12th house, which means that in some ways that sun's energy is so bright or so intense that it's almost needing to be hidden at times. What's interesting to me is that Donald Trump was born with the sun conjunct Uranus, which is kind of his outside of the box. It's his permission from the cosmos to not follow rules or to make rules up as he goes, for better and or worse. J.D. Vance has Uranus trining the sun. That sun trine Uranus, in a way, gives him that same license, or allows him to take that license of being unique, of being different, of being outside of the box, of being genius when it's working. But I always say with Uranus, in a close aspect, it's like when you're hot, and when you're not, you're not. And there's no in between. It's like an electric light bulb. It's either on or off. But the sun trine Uranus is certainly the meteoric or electric or sudden, switch that was flipped in J.D. Vance's life as he's made major changes from where he started from in life to where he went to school, to how he was adopted, by Peter Thiel, and then therefore financed in his Senate race, and all of a sudden a vice presidential candidate. Without making any judgments on that, it's just that's very much a Sun Uranus trine kind of energy. Another thing that's, I think, very strong in his chart are the squares between Leo and Scorpio. And in fact, there are other squares too, but the fact that the sun is so tightly square Saturn, it's a partile, meaning same degree, the sun at 10 degrees, 22 minutes of Leo, and Saturn at 10 degrees, 2 minutes of Scorpio. It's about a third of a degree from being exact. Remember, Harris has a Sun-Saturn trine, which means that there is an unobstructed flow between that sense of authority and reality and rules, for better and for worse, to the sun. In J.D. Vance's chart, that's square. Now, squares are not bad, but they denote an engagement. And here, this is the engagement and or even conflict, which can be very powerfully creative, but it's that need to work harder to overcome the bumping into that restriction or the rules or the authority, to overcome them. And I think that this is something that feeds J.D. Vance in his desire to be more than, or to achieve, some people might even say to overstep what he's earned. But there's something about that drive and the drive and the need to establish that sense of authority. Now, separate from that, there's also a square, again, a tight square. It's not partile, although it's still close. It's not partile because Venus is 23, about 23 and a half degrees of Leo, and Mars is 22, about 22 and a half degrees of Scorpio. It's only a degree apart from being exact. But again, it's Leo to Scorpio. It's fixed energy, and the Leo wants to kind of express the intention, and the Scorpio wants to hold in with a deeper level of expression, not put everything on the surface, and drive toward a deeper meaning. With J.D. Vance, that square between Venus and Mars, I think it can, again, be incredibly creative, because when Venus and Mars dance together, even in square, they can be incredibly magically creative. But if the ego is involved, they can also be very destructive, because Venus and Mars, remember, are the cosmic lovers. And Venus and Mars, often when they're square, can indicate an engagement in different ways of approaching the masculine and the feminine, the Mars masculine and the Venus the feminine. I don't mean gender here. I mean I don't mean sexuality. I mean gender. I mean that sense of yang Mars, yin Venus, and I think here we can see also the conflict that J.D. Vance has over the relationship between masculine and feminine. His judgment, which one might say is very anti-feminine from a standpoint of equanimity, And I think that that's very telling with that Venus-Mars square, how he wears it and what he does with it, and his judgment based upon that Mars in Scorpio of how passionate and strongly he feels about the purpose of the male versus the expression and purpose of the Venus in Leo, the female energy. And then we get to the Mercury rising in Virgo. Now remember, he has Leo on the ascendant, but Mercury is coming up toward the ascendant, and Mercury is tightly squared to Chiron, and it's also squared to Uranus. Now remember that Uranus is trining the sun. There's a flow of energy there, but when he opens up his mouth, when he talks, when he writes, the specificity, or one might even say the over specificity of that Mercury in Virgo gets him into a bit of trouble, because it conflicts with that sense of the breaking out of the rules, the sense of the freedom of expression, and also with that whole piece of the need for healing. Now he does have Chiron conjoined conjoined the North Node in the 10th house. And so regardless of what one might suggest his motives are, and whether one is, for him or against him, either as a candidate or as a human being, that Chiron conjunct the North Node, he's driven to do something to heal what he thinks is ailing himself and or others. But I would suggest that it's the square to Mercury, especially Mercury that is dignified because it's exalted, and in its domicile in Virgo. And I think that becomes a bit of a problem for him. I'm going to check in the chat box in just a moment. I haven't looked there. Before I jump back to the chat box and before we take our break, which we will do in just a moment, I want to take a quick look at Tim Walz's chart. And now with Tim Walz, even though here I'm showing an ascendant, I actually wish that I didn't have that. I think I'm going to rerun this here. Just bear with me here one quick second as I go back and take Tim Walz's chart and very quickly edit it so that I'm going to not show an ascendant, because we really don't know his ascendant. I've run the chart for noon, because if we don't have a time, often if we run a chart for noon, that'll give us a sense of where the moon is on the day that Tim Walz was born. And for those of you who know my chart, you know that I was born April 6th also, which means, like Tim Walz, my sun is at 16 degrees of Aries. Everything else in our chart's different. Well, we both have Mars in Aries. Incidentally, that Mars in Aries, close to Eris, with the Sun and Jupiter all in Aries. Remember, this is a guy who spent 24 years in the military. And certainly not that my Mars in Aries meant that I spent that time in the military, but it is a natural outlet for that amount of Aries energy. At least it was for him. Once again, we see a very strong Uranus. In his case, instead of Mercury squaring Uranus like it was there's the old Tim Walz. Hold on. Instead of seeing Mercury squaring Uranus like in J.D. Vance's chart, here we see Mercury. There we go. Here we see Mercury trining Uranus. And so it's almost like there is an open flow of energy from what he says to that need for eccentric, out-of-the-box originality. Some people would say here's someone who, even though he's allegedly done a lot, within the rules, meaning within the military or within government, his Venus is square Saturn. And his Venus is also square Uranus, so that Uranus isn't always easy for him, but somehow when he speaks, he gets to talk about those things in a more flowing way, in an easier way than someone with the Mercury square Uranus, like J.D. Vance. We do not know what his moon is. We might conjecture that his moon is in Aquarius, and we might even conjecture that it is trine Venus, but we don't really know. If he was born in the morning before, before 6 a.m., his moon would have been in Capricorn. And that may be his attraction to working within the rules of the military or teaching or being in government. These are all Capricornian type things. We don't know. What we do know, however, is that his Mercury is trine Uranus, that he has all the stuff in Aries. We do know that his Venus is square Saturn, which is the part of him that, again, like Donald Trump, but maybe lived out and played differently. We know that there is either delayed gratification when it comes to love or money. This is someone who's not wealthy, someone who's lived on teachers and salary for most of his life. And that may be a statement of that Venus square Saturn, or his commitment in relationship. Obviously very different than the way Donald Trump has expressed his Venus conjunct Saturn. But beyond that, we can't say a whole lot about his moon or those aspects. We just don't know. We do know, though, that there's a couple of very strong quincunxes. Those are those fat green lines. And quincunxes are irritating. They're unstable. They require constant attention. And one of them has to do with his sun to Neptune, which is interesting because Neptune flows smoothly. It's a trine to Chiron. There's something about this is maybe in his teaching ability, maybe in his working, as a coach or in classes, that ability to heal others, maybe students, through inspiration and through, the imagery of Neptune. And yet there's this need to come back and work on the details that don't always make sense, that they're constantly needing to be revised. This Neptune to Sun is almost like being a spiritually, I don't want to say outcast, but not being able to find a real home. And I don't really know how that works for him individually, but some of the things that he said to me just indicates that his spirituality is more based upon a pragmatic and realistic approach to life, rather than what we might call a spiritual pursuit. But that's just conjecture. The other very close quincunx, though, is between Mars and Uranus. And Mars and Uranus together can be explosive and feisty and fiery. And yet here, because they're quincunx, the two energies don't get along. And again, here the energy is that energy in Aries. It's almost like on one hand, his Aries sun is being held back in some way, modified or tempered by the uncertainty of what's important in the spiritual dimensions. And on the other section here, that fiery, feisty Mars in Aries, which is ready to take on anyone at any time, is kind of like exacerbated by the Uranus, to the extent that he may have had to learn early on how to control his temper and or how to work with that energy so it doesn't constantly get him into trouble. These are conjectures. I don't know for sure, but those are some of my thoughts and feelings. I'm now going to go back and check the chat box, and then we are going to take a break. So I'm just going down here pretty quickly. We're past the no one is mean, where someone says, I'm a father figure. Oh, well, thank you, I think. Just kind of going down, I just want to make sure if there's something really important. Catherine says, it seems like one chart is about having a strong basis in justice, but another in belligerence. Catherine, I might agree with you, but again, someone who's on a different side of a political spectrum might see those two things very differently. And I'm not here to force one view or another. I'm here to just simply talk about the charts as I see them, and to acknowledge that different people can have different perceptions. And in some ways, I think part of the struggle of whatever happens during this election season in the United States, and I should apologize to all of you who are perhaps online or will be watching this, who are not U.S. citizens, although what happens in the U.S. elections actually has impact on the rest of the planet, for better and or for worse. I think, though, that it's important to understand that whatever happens in this election, we still got problems in the United States because of our inability to communicate with the various extreme factions on almost any and every issue. And somehow we have to move beyond that. I don't know how that's possible, but we have to. And that's pretty much that. All right. So let's go. Let's drop thank you, Gail. Drop the drama. I don't care who said what in the past, whatever. Let's not defend ourselves, and let's not accuse. Let's go on. Achy leftist witch. I didn't know he was adopted by Peter Thiel. Yeah, Peter Thiel pretty much paid for his Senate race, and pretty much convinced Trump. I think that there was there's a definite, very strong Peter Thiel adopting that's J.D. Vance, and that's not something I'm making up. You can read all about that all over the place. And all right, just Saturn square might account for awkwardness. That is true. The 29 degree Neptune, everything that everyone's saying is good. I appreciate that. Overcome a lot. He was a drug addict. Made a movie about it. We're talking about J.D. Vance and his biography, which was turned into a movie. Hillbilly Eulogy. Yep. And just cycling through all this, and lots of comments. And I'm just kind of, Trump's niece and brother didn't like him either. We're talking about someone brought up Walz's brother, who's not a fan. That's all true. People disagree in politics, and that's right. Walz was really the breakaway from his family and from the country that he came to. Most of the people around him and in the world he grew up in, it was, Nebraska is certainly a red state, and in a very small community, rural farming community, he was the breakaway. And so, but if we're talking about people who, hate relatives, just look at Mary Trump and Donald Trump. And I'm not saying one to counter the other. I'm saying, sure, that's true. India, hi India, says that this moment in history is very similar to the rise of Stalin or Hitler. Let's remember that Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, all came to rise during the late 20s, early 30s, when Saturn was opposing Pluto. And it was the Saturn conjunction of Pluto, in 2020, right around the insurrection period of time, and that whole thing. These are, and I'll drill down on this next month when I talk about, or on the mid-month update, when I talk about the Saturn-Pluto cycles. Very, very true, very true. All right. I'm just cycling through these very, very quickly. And your comments are all great. I appreciate you're all being, Intuitive Karen says, who is Peter Thiel? He is a a multiple investor. He was one of the original investors in PayPal. I think that he made a fortune in Silicon Valley, and is a major Silicon Valley player, and is a strong conservative, and a semi-out gay man. He's a major player, and he's the person who pretty much picked and financed J.D. Vance in his Senate race out of nowhere. Let's see. What's this Walz overdosed? Get rid of that. Go.
Hey, Rick, we're starting to run over. If we want to have time for other
okay, no, we're good.
Signs, then we need to take a break now.
All right, thank you for that, Sam. And we are going to now take a. Let's see, it is 3:55 here, which means that it's just on the hour. We'll start at in 15 minutes at 10 after the hour. So if you're at Soul Food, this is your time to go spend money, buy a drink, buy yourself some coffee, get something that you might have otherwise bought at some big box store or on Amazon. Vote with your dollars. Keep this stuff alive by supporting. We vote not only on election day, but we vote with where we spend our money. And we will reconvene in 15 minutes. If you want your chart potentially looked at, put it on a small piece of paper, your birth date, place, and time. Give it to Sam. Sam's going to pick 2 or 3 of them out of a hat, and we will pick up the pieces in 15 minutes. And that's it. We're going to go offline. For those of you who are watching online, hang with us, and we will be back in about 15 minutes. Anything else, Sam? Did I miss anything? I guess not.
Nope, we're good over here.
All right, so let's do this. All right. Hello, all. We are back. Okay, greetings all. Sam, are we good to go? Are you there?
Yeah, we're ready to go.
All right. So the first chart that we have that I am going to pull up is the chart for Molly. And let me get that chart up. And let's see, where do we go here? Okay, I think that might be Molly's chart. And okay, I think that might be Molly's chart. And okay, I think that might be Molly's chart. Okay, well, this is going to be confusing because I have a 10-second delay on everything with Molly on camera. Okay, well, this is going to be confusing because I have a 10-second delay on everything with Molly on camera.
There's no delay.
I have a 10-second delay on everything with Molly on camera. So, Sam, I think what we should probably do is let me just talk about the chart. I think what we should probably do is let me just talk about the chart. I think what we should probably do is
I don't know what's happening. Oh, I see. That makes sense.
All right, Sam, are you there? We'll get there in a moment, folks. Thanks for your patience. I think what we should do is let me talk about the chart for a few minutes, and then we'll get Molly on to give us a little bit of feedback. Hi, Molly. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So, Molly, we have Molly's chart.
Sounds good.
Okay, we have Molly's chart. Oh, look at that. Another Leo rising, but Molly was born just a few minutes after the sun moved into Virgo. And that's intriguing because when I see a chart that has like the sun or the moon, something moving fast, even Mercury, having just moved into a new sign, it's almost like it's almost like the fetus, as it's kind of getting ready to come out, is like a surfer waiting for a right wave. And it's almost like it was something about Molly's DNA that said, if I have Leo rising and I'm a Leo, that's going to be too much. I need to hold back just a little bit. And okay, the sun's in Virgo, boom, away I go. And whether it's a natural birth or induced or cesarean, somehow it just seems to work that way. When I look at this chart, I also see that the moon in the latter degrees of Libra, that there's an energy here that's about wanting to hold back some of that fiery Leo kind of self-expression and wanting to say the right thing, do the right thing. The Mercury square Saturn on one side, Mercury at 16 Virgo, square Saturn at almost 14 Gemini. And that opposed, the Saturn opposed Leo, Saturn opposed Pluto, and Mercury square Pluto. It's almost like the intellectual function here in some ways I don't want to say it's at odds with, but there's like a deep, whether it's from family, from tradition, there's some powerful stuff going on behind the scenes that has to do with a bit of a power struggle of what maybe it's one parent versus the other, or one way of looking at it, one religion, one political way. There's something here about this ongoing struggle between doing what's right, saying what's correct versus falling into line with authority, not shaking up the status quo. Even the moon's position at the half square and square and a half point. You know, we have this Saturn opposed Pluto, which is definitely related in some way to a deep power struggle. Remember, the Saturn-Pluto opposition of 2001 brought us September 11th, 2001. Molly was born, just a few weeks before that. Molly was just, less than a month old when that all went down. And in some ways, there's something about the stress and the tension that was released with whatever that was, that with Molly's Libra moon and that moon square Venus kind of puts her in a position of being, in some ways, a mediator, a diplomat, a peacemaker, somehow being born into a situation and trying to make that struggle okay. It seems to me that also with Uranus so closely sextile, Mars conjoined with Chiron, Mars Chiron lined up at 22 degrees of Sagittarius. And often when I see Mars and Chiron together, there's some sort of block and a blockage. And the blockage here, again, I think is played out in a different way with that Saturn-Pluto opposition. There's some sort of inherent power struggle, and yet that Mars conjoined with Chiron, because it's sextile to Uranus, it's almost like you get to break out of that craziness by being crazier. There's something about your life, Molly, that gives you the gift of kind of coming up with a solution that almost is like not playing the game. Uranus not only being sextiled by the Mars and Chiron, but also being tied to the moon in Libra. But normally that peacemaker Libra moon in your chart, because it's so close to the trine to Uranus, there's something about how you intermediate, how you play the role of the go-between. It's almost like you do it in a way that is unexpected and unusual, and I don't know how that is or what that is, but it's almost like a lot of your being has to do with how do you resolve these conflicts that are about feelings that you can't express easily. The Venus in Cancer, the part of you that is maybe softer and smushier, but somehow has a hard time, asking for what you need, kind of expressing what it is that you're feeling. And so you end up doing it in a way that is either more intellectual or action oriented or sudden or something, or even studying a whole lot to learn to get enough information to break out of whatever that power struggle is. There's a lot in your chart about wanting to do the right thing, but sometimes not really being able to express the feelings because of fear, either of rejection or the fear of it's almost like there's a lot of energy in your chart that's oriented towards your eccentricities, or your, I want to call it craziness, is a way of kind of breaking out of the conflicts. I'm going to stop talking now and ask you to kind of come on mic and just give us a little bit of feedback if any of that made any sense to you, and if so, what did or didn't. It's kind of strange doing this way, but I'll be quiet now and wait for you to say something, and thank you for sharing. It's kind of strange doing this way, but I'll be quiet now and wait for you to say something, and thank you for sharing.
Hello, Rick.
It's kind of strange doing this way, but I'll be quiet now and wait for you to say something, and thank you for sharing.
Hello, Rick. So first of all, Rick, I've never had my chart read, so that was quite interesting. And I would, oh God, this is going to be so difficult. And I would have to agree that I very much, thank you. I very much have like always played the mediator in life. Like I am a middle child of a very, very calm older sister and a very, very crazy younger sister. So I've always like lived in the middle of those two things. And what you said about my Cancer, like I don't remember what placement it is, but I've always found it very difficult to speak of anything emotional. And I do kind of look at it in a very analytical way. Like it doesn't just pour out of me naturally. It's like has steps to it. And so my mother always told me that, because my mother was in labor with me for 36 hours, and she always told me that I was born after Leo ended for the good for her and my dad, because raising a Leo sun and a Leo rising would be too much for them. So she agrees with you that it was very much right timing, and I waited until the 23rd.
Yeah, but it was only just a few minutes into Virgo, regardless of the date. If you'd been born 15 or 20 minutes earlier, you would have been a 29-degree Leo. Yep.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think it was around the last hour in which the hospital was like, okay, we're doing emergency cesarean now.
Yeah.
So divine timing. And I'm thankful for my Virgo-ness, because it keeps me sane and getting things done.
Yeah, but there is a price to pay, and I think that there is potential for you becoming, as you continue to grow and mature, there is potential for you to become more comfortable with your feelings and feel safe about actually expressing them. I think that sometimes the Venus in Cancer, it's almost like the thought or the feeling is, well, if you loved me, I wouldn't have to ask. You would know what I needed or know what I want. And yet I think that there is something to be gained in your life about finding the strength to actually test what happens when you express your vulnerability, or to share, what it is where you feel like, I have a hard time asking for this, but here's what I'm feeling. It seems like that's, an important piece of, of who you are. And then the other thing is that when I talked about Regulus, with Trump's chart in particular, you were born with the sun in your chart lined up with that royal star. And I'm not suggesting that you're a vengeful person. Incidentally, my Saturn is at that same position lined up with Regulus. But it is in some ways a sign of royalty, a sign of, fortuitousness, as long as one can be compassionate and be kind and not fall back on that concept of revenge. So more some other time, but that's what I have to say to you tonight. I hope it's of some use and some meaning.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay. Next chart that we have is it Tamsin? Is that the name? Hello, Tamsin. Tamsin. Hello, Tamsin.
Hi, Rick.
I'm going to just jump in the same as I did before and just kind of talk a little bit and then give you a chance to respond. I'm going to just jump in the same as I did before and just kind of talk a little bit and then give you a chance to respond. Okay, and Sam, if we can get rid of that feedback again, that would be great. Whatever you did last time worked. All right, so when I look at your chart, first of all, I see that you were born the day before a new moon. How do I know that? Well, you are, like Molly, a sun in Virgo, but you're a very different Virgo, although you actually share some traits. First of all, you were born with the sun and Jupiter and Mercury and Saturn all in Virgo. So in some ways, you're a super Virgo. And Virgos are basically people who need to make decisions. Virgo is the yes-no energy of the zodiac. Virgo is, often you read that Virgo is about being critical. Well, it's being critical to the extent that Virgo is the binary function of the universe, meaning that things are okay or not okay. They say that Virgos seek perfection, and in some way they do. But what they really seek is the ability to know what's okay, what's not okay, what's effective, what's not effective, what's efficient, what's not efficient. And with your chart, because Jupiter, the planet of expansion, is so close to your sun, it's like this becomes a very important philosophical issue for you. But your Mercury is also in Virgo. You think like a Virgo. And then because Saturn is also in Virgo, Saturn is how you respect laws or rules or traditions. And in some ways, it's like you can have this really big idea and then kind of do all the logic and thinking about it, and then finally come up with a reason why you can't do it or shouldn't do it, or if you're going to do it, here's how the best way it is for you to do it. And I think some of the problem, though, that you have with all of that is the fact that your Virgo planets are square to Neptune. That's that big fat red line going to Neptune at 19 degrees of Sagittarius. And so there's a part of you, I think, that has a huge imagination. Your fantasy life, your dreams, your how you think in your inner world. It's almost like that's at odds with then having to make it real and make it happen and deal with it in the real world. And in some ways, it's your Leo moon that kind of takes that energy and reflects it and turns it into something that is creative, something that is self-expressive, something that has the intention of actually doing something in the outer world. And all of this gets focused through a Cancer rising. And Cancer is the crab. It's the self-protecting, it's the crab with the hard outer shell. And I would imagine on some level that your feelings can be very intense and very passionate, and sometimes people don't have a clue as to what you're feeling because there's a part of you that just knows how to be invisible. It's like Harry Potter's invisibility cloak, that if you want to keep something secret, your Leo moon can put on a song and a dance and kind of go outward and express, and yet people don't have a clue as to what they're not seeing because you don't express it. And I think that that your feelings are very strong, very passionate, and sometimes there's this conflict, this engagement between how you want to kind of be lighthearted and want to be expressive and want to share that energy, and yet it's so strong that it's almost like you're afraid that if you do, you'll either scare someone away or it'll be too much. And so that the natural impulse is to just kind of hold it in and be quiet, become intellectual, become thoughtful about it. Yeah. So how do you think about all of that? And more important, not more importantly, what is your interest in learning and study, and what is it that you do in a way that you really want to do? And is there some healing aspect that you work with? Because all those planets in Virgo are harmonized or trine to Chiron, and there's something very practical about you as teacher or you as potential healer. So your turn.
My friends are here and they're all like, wow, because you just read me. I'm at an interesting place in my life right now where my career is set, and I'm trying to weave my personal life into my career. And I've always had this, I come from an art background. I come from performing arts and film with this. I had huge imagination as a kid. And then I went into science and research and Chinese medicine. And now I do metaphysics and a lot of spiritual teaching. So it's weaving, but I approach it in a very logical, practical way. But a part of that work is being able to be very vulnerable in public. And even something like this, I was really excited to get my chart read. But once I made that decision, I was like, wait, I don't know if I want to do this. Everyone in the world is going to know my whole chart. And so it's this constant conflict of being more practical, but also I have this wild imagination, and exactly what you say, I feel so deeply and passionately. And in my youth, my emotions were very overwhelming, and sometimes they would be consuming. And as I get older, I'm trying to figure out how to honor those feelings without having it consume me. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would imagine that these past few years in particular, even going back to maybe over the last year, and even now, what I'm thinking of is that you have all these planets, including the sun in Virgo. Right now, Saturn is moving through Pisces, through the opposite sign. And it's almost like what was going on in your life about, let's say 14 years ago, give or take, a couple of years. So we're right now 2024, right around 2010, in that period of time, it's almost like you began a new phase of your life. You set things into emotion. This was also coming into your, 28, 29, 30, the Saturn return period. But for you, it was almost like there was a need to focus your energy and to set off on a new path. And what I'm seeing right now is that in some way that path, I don't want to say it's done, but you can't continue growing or climbing the ladder or moving along the path that you've been on for the past 12, 13, 14 years, because in some ways the ladder's run out of rungs. And so now you need to figure out how to reconstruct your life to consolidate where you are and in a way get ready for a big shift and a big change that may be already unfolding. You kind of alluded to it, but I think that the really most important part of this is not yet unfolded, and it has to do with something that you need to give up. And I don't mean that's a loss. It's almost like when the garden comes to fruition, you have to decide what you're going to harvest and what you're going to replant, how you're going to put up what you've harvested. And in some ways, you're at that point of fruition, but it's also a change point that begins the next phase of a cycle. And I think that some of what's been going on over the past year or so as Neptune moves through the very end of Pisces and is moving opposite your Saturn, this is like a reality check where what were dreams, the illusions, and illusions aren't based upon anything wrong. Illusions are fantasies, and dreams do come real. But it's like this is a time in your life where the dreams, how do I want to say this? The clouds of illusion are precipitating to Earth. And sometimes dreams on Earth don't seem as beautiful as they were in dreams, but they're real. And there's something about what's going on in your life now is about a transition of taking those dreams and deciding which ones need to be left as dreams and which ones are going to become real. And that's what I have to say to you. What do you think about that?
I think it has a lot to do maybe with my romantic relationships, because about 14 years ago, I experienced a traumatic death. I lost my partner then, and that set me off on a completely different path. And so this past year, or the last 2 years, I've had these romantic relationships that were vastly different, but definitely influenced by that loss in some way. And then when I look at it in the last 10, 14 years, that has been the main theme that I've been ignoring. But what happened in this past year, it really brought into light that I really have to put more focus and intention on what this means in my life romantically. And romantic relationships have never been a big thing in my life. Like, I never really put as much work into it as I have in my education or my career. I just always ended up in it. But that seems to be the big theme, especially this past year.
Yeah. And I think that that's part of that garden coming to fruition. It's like those things that have fruited. And now it's a matter of making decisions of how to bring into focus the things that you want to come into fruition in this next phase. So all food for thought. But thank you for being open and sharing what you shared. And good luck.
Thanks so much, Rick.
Okay. Thank you. And last but not least, I think we're going to take a look at Makia's chart. And hey, Makia. I know Makia. I don't know that I've ever really looked at your chart, so this will be fun. Hey, how are you? I think you're on mute, but that's okay. I'm going to just call up your chart and I'm going to jump in and then I'll give you a chance to respond. And once I ask you, there'll be about a 10-second delay. So I'm just going to jump in.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited. I'm muting now.
Okay, well done. All right. So Makia was born at sunrise. How do I know that? Because the sun at 18 degrees and 57 minutes, that's almost 19 degrees of Aquarius, is at the same degree just about as the ascendant. This is the eastern horizon. And so the sun had just come up over the horizon, which gives Makia an illuminating, sunny, shiny, outgoing disposition. But the sun is in Aquarius. And, you know, the sun is at home in Leo, which is opposite Aquarius. And if you think about it, Aquarius is midwinter. The sun is as far away from its home as it can get. And so often the sun in Aquarius is the sign of those who are the weirdos of the zodiac, the eccentrics. Aquarius, you know, is the water bearer, but it's not a water sign. It's an air sign. And without moisture in the air, there's no emotional communication. You go to the tropics, to Latin countries, to warm, wet countries, and there's like an emotional flowing. But if you go to like the Nordic countries, or where it's cold or colder and drier, even like Japan or Sweden, Norway, even England in the wintertime, where it certainly is wet though, there's a sense of emotions being contained because the dry air doesn't conduct electricity. And so you need moisture in the air for feelings to be communicated. Now, the magic of Makia's chart is that she is a Sun in Aquarius, Mercury in Aquarius, and Aquarius rising. So arguably, Aquarius is the most intelligent sign in the zodiac. And I don't mean just the smartest smart. I mean, conceptually, Aquarians can often put together complex ideas into big pictures and turn them into some sort of conceptual understanding. And in Makia's chart, there's there's two things that emphasize that even more. One is the fact that in astrology, every sign relates to a planet and every planet relates to a sign. The sun, for example, relates to Leo. We already said that. The sun is at home in Leo in the midsummer. And in the wintertime, the sun in Aquarius is very far away from its home. All right. The planet that relates to Aquarius in modern astrology is Uranus. And in Makia's chart, we can see that Uranus is at 18 degrees of Libra, harmonized 1/3 of a circle, trine to the sun at 18 degrees of Aquarius. And so it's almost like Makia gets to channel that electric, intellectual, kind of sudden energy that can be ingenious, but it also can be sometimes not. In other words, I always say that Aquarius, when it's hot, and when it's not, it's not. And it's like lightning striking. When it strikes, it's striking, but when it's not existent. And with that Uranus trine the sun, one would imagine that there are lightning strikes in Makia's life that change things suddenly when that lightning strikes. Whether it's a shift of life direction, whether it's meeting someone and falling in love, whether it's losing someone, suddenly there's that sense of the sudden shifts that become significant. Now, the other thing that feeds into all of that is that when you were born, the moon was lining up with or conjoined to Neptune, which is the sign of the dreamer. And it's in the sign of Sagittarius. Neptune is imagination and fantasy. We talked about that in the previous chart. But Neptune is about anything that has to do with imagination. And your Neptune is lined up with the moon in Sagittarius. Sagittarius is the sign of adventure. It's the sign of bigger, better, more. It's the sign of an adventure doesn't have to be Indiana Jones traipsing around the planet. It can be an intellectual. It can be lined up with Neptune. It certainly can be a spiritual adventure. Also, Neptune is the planet of music. And I know that you have a strong, interest and love and, in music, even in performance. And that moon and Neptune so close to the highest point of your chart would indicate that there are aspirations toward, being that dreamer, performer, musician with big ideas and aspirations. And yet that Sagittarius energy is opposite Saturn at the very last degree of Taurus, way at the bottom of the chart. And that becomes an anchor. And so in a way, a lot of your life is about balancing or it's not even balancing. It's I'm rocking back and forth as I say this, is trying to take these extremes of this big idea of wanting to be, a rock star, a high priestess in the church of Makia, so to speak, because it's about the dream and the Neptune, the illusion, the magic of the dance, of the performance, of the music at the top of the chart. But Saturn, the planet of structure, of reality, of authority, is kind of, in a way, it's an anchor. and you have that anchor in your chart so strong, and it becomes the transformational planet, the metamorphic planet of Pluto, that is actually the releasing energy that deepens and intensifies, your conflicts in a way that it really has to do with how you move through transformation. Whether it's the transformation of maturity or the transformation of changing relationship or the transformation of changing profession or career. These are all really important pieces of how the energy flows in your chart. And then there's one other thing that I would be remiss if I didn't mention, and that is the fact that you have in your chart a configuration that astrologers call a mystic rectangle. And in fact, I'm going to just kind of cut out, again, some of the noise like I did before. And I'm going to just show certain planets connected here. Just bear with me here a second while I do this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show, let's see, we're going to show the moon and Neptune, and they're opposite Saturn, so we're going to show Saturn. And then we're going to show Venus, which is opposite Pluto, which is the intensity with which you love. It's the power and the transformational ability of the full engagement of love. And I'm going to now get rid of everything else so you can see what astrologers call a mystic rectangle. And a mystic rectangle are two oppositions. In your case, it's the opposition between, let's call it Dad or Saturn or authority or the rules, Saturn, opposite the dreams, the moon, the mom, the idea of what you want to be in the outer world, versus what the anchor is in the inner world. And that opposition tied to the opposition of Pluto, the planet of transformation, and Venus, the planet of love. Your Venus in Pisces is the astrologer's preferred place for Venus. Venus is said to be exalted in Pisces because it is loving and compassionate and spiritual love. It's agape love. It's not an I love you, it's a love. Anyhow, when you take a look at this whole pattern, you see a sextile, the moon to Pluto, followed by a trine, Pluto to Saturn, followed by a sextile, Saturn back to Venus, followed by a trine, Venus back to the moon. And this basically shows an easy flow on the outside. People looking from the outside in see this magical energy, but on the inside, there's this, I don't want to say conflict, it's more about the awareness of irresolvable opposites, because in a way, these oppositions are you in the middle with the intensity and the passion of Pluto pulling one way, and the sweetness and the compassion of Venus pulling the other. It's the dream of the world as a musical fantasy song versus the reality of the hard work that you have to do to keep it together. And yet those opposite sides of the coin are all hung together by these smooth flowing opportunity and kind of just easy flowing energy. And what's interesting though is that as we look at that pattern, it does not include your weirdo, eccentric Aquarius sun that says, I don't have to try to be different. I'm Makia. I am different. I am unique. And there's a whole futuristic, other than normal. Normalcy is not what attracts you. What attracts you is the ability to be as unique as you can as you move through the world. Two other things very quickly. One is that, like Tim Walz and like Rick Levine, you have Mars in Aries, which is the part of you which is fiery and feisty and ready to take on an opponent. And, whether it's, arm wrestling or real wrestling or fighting for what you believe, that Mars in Aries can go to task. Let me get the other lines back in here. So that as I continue this, I think, well, no, that's too much. Hang on one second. Aspected points, and we're going to go here. There we go. Oh, that didn't do it either. One more try. Why isn't there one showing that I want? Okay, here we go. All right, this is not being cooperative. If I don't get it this time, I'm going to be done. That's this big set. Let's get rid of that. And let's try one more time. Aspected points. And let's try there. Okay, that'll do it. That what's important is that the part of you that is the sun and Mercury in Aquarius, the Aquarius rising, your presentation in some ways as social, as friendly, but not necessarily emotionally connected. You are very emotional and passionate, but it doesn't necessarily come across while you're expressing that Aquarian energy with the Uranus energy. That comes more across is as intellectual and brilliant and futuristic. And in some ways that's a blessing, and in some ways it's difficult, because I would imagine on some level that Aquarius trine your sun in the Uranus trine your sun in Aquarius and your Aquarius rising, sometimes I think make it difficult for you to connect on an emotional basis, even though the warmth and the feelings and the passion and the compassion are there. One last thing I would say, just as a matter of timing, and that is, and I do know a little bit about your life, but I would imagine that as Saturn moved through Aquarius, as it did through 2001 to into 2003, and Saturn moved across all of your Aquarius planets and over your ascendant, in some ways that began a new phase of your life that in some ways is a phase of preparation and doing what you need to do until you kind of get it together. And I don't mean that you don't have it together, but until you get more tools, more resources, more whatever, so that you can set out on your next life journey. This doesn't mean that what you're doing is either not part of your life. It doesn't mean that you're unhappy. It just means that between now and your second Saturn return, the work that you are doing is getting you ready for the next phase, which I think going back, to your, first Saturn return at 29, 30, 31, in that period of time when you launched your life. In some ways, this will be that second time round. And so I think that right now you're going through a phase of, one astrologer calls it the period of obscurity, but it doesn't mean unhappiness. It means that there's a bit of safety of what you're doing and where you are that gives you the ability to gather the tools and the resources that you'll need for whatever it is that you start in the next phase. So that's it. I'm going to be quiet now for a moment and ask you to respond a little bit, and then we're going to say goodnight. And I'll say thank you to you and to your home at Soul Food for giving us the opportunity to do this.
Well, thanks so much, Rick. It was very right on and very helpful. I know that the only water in my chart is that Venus in Pisces. And my love language is different than what most people think it would be, but that is like helping. And I do feel like I do feel sometimes like the world it hasn't caught up with me yet. But I do come across as a little airheadedness at times. But that just means I'm just not playing. So, but yeah, that was very awesome. Thank you so much.
And when I get back to Seattle next week, maybe we can have a little sit down. And while we're not in front of the rest of the universe or the some 400 people that are still online right now, that we can talk a little bit more about that. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And with that, I'm going to say thank you to everyone who showed up at Soul Food. And for the record, I will be back there in person next month. Actually, for the next couple of months, I will be back in person. And so I will see many of you next month at Soul Food. Also, keep in mind, for those of you who are on my $3 a month Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/Rick Levine if you're not. And there will be a mid-month in which we will talk more about the Saturn-Pluto cycle. Also, for the record, I did record with Steve Judd today, and with Amanda at Astrology Hub. We recorded an hour or so of questions and answers. And that will go up sometime live in the next few weeks. I'll post it on my via my email to inform all of you. If you're not on my email, go to ricklevineastrologer.com, www.ricklevineastrologer.com. There it is. When you are on my email list, I will not overwhelm you with a lot of marketing crap. You will get a few things from me, but it will not be heavy duty. I will not use your email or sell it to anyone else, but by being on the mailing list, that will ensure that you are also entered every month into a drawing where we randomly pick someone, where I do an in-depth, but a mini reading on the harmonic aspects in your chart. And with that, Sam or Gail, do I have anything that I need to say that I didn't say yet? And if not, I think this is where I'm going to say good night. And for here, it's 5 a.m., so I'm going to say to myself, good morning. And by the way, Susie Cat, thank you for, I know you've commented a couple times that we're, in the same side of the universe, and there probably are some other people also. I reposted, it's under my name, but Gail posted just now the Steve and Rick link that Steve and I just did just on our own for Steve's channel. It's like a 5 minutes of us being more silly than anything else, but enjoy that. And if you do go see that, tell Steve that Rick sent you. Beyond that, I think that's it. I'm going to say goodnight to all of you, and I'll see you next month. And for those of you who are in Seattle, I'll see you at Soul Food next month. And with that, that's it. Adios. Think cosmically, act locally, and get out there and do what you need to do to make things happen. And with that, I'm going to end the stream. This will be up live at the same address on YouTube, so you'll be able to watch it and or share it with others. And with that, I'm going to say good night. And Sam and Gail, if you would stay on just for a minute, that would be great.